My name is Liam Carter. I'm 29 years old, and it's 2023 here in Los Angeles, California. They say love makes you blind, but sometimes it just teaches you how to see in the dark. I thought Sienna and I had everything: trust, laughter, and a future we both dreamed about. Until she started calling me something I never thought I'd hear from the person I loved: insecure. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that it blinded you to the truth, stay till the end, because what I found on her phone that night didn't just break my heart, it woke me up. It started quietly, the way cracks always do: small, invisible, and easy to ignore. Sienna had become distant. Her laughter sounded rehearsed. Her eyes searched for exits even when she was sitting next to me. Late-night texts turned into early morning excuses, and every time I tried to talk about it, she'd twist it into something wrong with me. Liam, you're overthinking again. Liam, stop being paranoid. And then that final word: you're insecure. I remember standing there in her kitchen, coffee in my hand going cold, while she scrolled through her phone like I wasn't even there. I tried to smile, tried to swallow my pride, but there was something in her tone that didn't sound like love anymore. It sounded like distance pretending to care. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words, her eyes, her silence. I opened my laptop just to distract myself, maybe watch something mindless. But as I connected my Bluetooth earbuds, something unexpected happened. Her phone synced automatically. Sienna had once connected it to my laptop months ago to transfer photos, and I'd forgotten. But now, without warning, her device started backing up again. At first, I froze. I knew it wasn't right. I didn't want to invade her privacy. But when the small notification appeared, 150 new photos syncing, my chest tightened. I told myself to ignore it, to respect her space. But curiosity and pain are cruel partners. They whisper things logic can't silence. The folder opened on its own as the sync completed. It was titled Moments. Just that simple, innocent. I clicked it, thinking it was from our last trip. The first few pictures were harmless: sunsets, dinners, us smiling. But then the sequence changed. The next photo wasn't ours. It was of her, same smile, same eyes, but not with me. Her hand rested on someone else's shoulder. Then another, her wearing a dress I'd never seen. A reflection in a mirror, 2 wine glasses, one half empty. My breath caught. I didn't scroll fast. I didn't throw anything or curse. I just stared at the screen, frozen, watching the version of her I didn't know unfold right in front of me. It felt like I was meeting a stranger who lived in my own home. There was one photo, the one that stayed with me. She was sitting by the ocean at night, the wind blowing her hair, her head resting on his shoulder. He was half out of frame, but I recognized his jacket. It belonged to someone we both knew, my colleague, Adrian. Everything inside me went quiet. Not anger, not tears, just silence, that heavy kind that feels like the world holding its breath. The next morning, she came over, acting normal. She kissed me on the cheek, brewed coffee, humming to herself. I watched her, every gesture, every word. It was almost beautiful how ordinary betrayal can look. "Rough night?" she asked. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "See, you're always stressed. You worry too much." I nodded. Maybe she was right. Maybe I did worry too much. But she didn't know I already knew. When she went to the shower, I opened my laptop again, the screen glowing like a quiet witness. The photos were still there, each one sharper than before. I copied them into a folder and renamed it Proof. She came back, towel around her, smiling. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said softly, "just thinking." "About what?" I met her eyes. About how easily people call others insecure, just to hide their own guilt. Her smile faltered for a second. Just a second, but I saw it. That flicker of fear behind her calm face. She tilted her head. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, shutting the laptop. "Just a thought." The rest of the day passed like a movie I'd already seen. I listened, observed, memorized every word she said. Every "I love you" now sounded like an apology she didn't mean. That night, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. Some truths deserve silence before justice. I just lay there beside her, pretending to sleep, while she scrolled through her phone again, smiling at a screen she thought I couldn't see. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes when you finally stop begging for the truth because now you own it. I decided to wait, not to catch her, not to shame her, but to let her reveal who she really was without my words forcing it. Sometimes, silence exposes people better than questions ever could. And yet, part of me still hoped I was wrong, that somehow those photos meant nothing, that she'd explain it all, laugh about some misunderstanding, and we'd move on. But deep down, I already knew the woman lying beside me wasn't mine anymore. The next morning, she asked, "Are you still mad about last night?" I looked at her, smiled faintly, and said, "No, I'm just seeing things more clearly now." She laughed and walked away, completely unaware that the truth, her truth, was sitting quietly inside my laptop. And when she left for work, I opened it again, scrolling through the images one last time. That's when I saw it, a photo she must have taken recently, just a few days ago. Same smile, same ocean, but this time, something else in the background caught my eye. A hotel sign, one I recognized. The same one she told me she'd never been to. That was the moment I stopped hopping and started planning. That was the moment I stopped hopping and started planning. I didn't want chaos. I didn't want shouting or scenes or any of those dramatic endings people post online. I wanted peace, the kind that comes when you finally choose yourself over someone who keeps breaking you. The next few days, I moved through life quietly, almost invisible. Sienna still texted me good morning and good night. She still called me babe like the word hadn't lost its meaning. But I stopped replying right away. I stopped asking where she was. Each silence I gave her was a mirror, and she hated mirrors. On the third night, she came over unannounced. She smelled like perfume I hadn't bought her. Her hair was slightly damp, her smile a little too bright. "Surprise," she said, holding a bag of takeaway noodles. I smiled back. Nice surprise. We ate at the kitchen counter. She told me stories about her day, coworkers, the funny barista who spelled her name wrong. I nodded at the right places, laughed when I had to. But inside, every word she spoke became another note in the symphony of lies she didn't know I'd already heard. When she went to wash the dishes, her phone buzzed. I didn't move, didn't reach for it, but the screen lit up just long enough for me to see a name I already knew. Adrian, a heart emoji beside it. I looked at her silhouette in the kitchen light. She was humming softly, sleeves rolled up, pretending we were fine. Maybe part of her even believed it. Later, when she fell asleep on my couch, I watched her face, peaceful, trusting. There was a time I'd have killed to protect that peace. Now, I realized it wasn't my job anymore. Self-respect sometimes looks like letting someone sleep while you finally wake up. The next morning, I left early for work, leaving her a small note. "Take care of yourself, Sienna." No anger, no explanation. Just enough words to say goodbye without saying it out loud. At the office, Adrian greeted me with that same easy grin he always had. "Morning, mate." "Morning," I said back, my tone perfectly calm. It was strange, knowing what I knew, standing this close to the man from those photos. I studied him like an actor who didn't know I'd already read the script. He talked about weekend plans, mentioned a beach trip with friends. The same beach in that photo, the same jacket. My pulse stayed steady. I wasn't going to expose him, not yet. I'd already seen enough of what betrayal looks like. I wanted to see what guilt feels like when it starts realizing it's been caught. That evening, Sienna texted, "Can we talk tonight? You've been distant." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed, "Sure, come over after 8. When she arrived, the sky was bruised purple. I'd cleaned the flat, lit one candle, played the quiet instrumental music she liked. She looked relieved, maybe thinking this was an apology waiting to happen. "Liam," she said softly, setting her bag down. "I feel like we've been off lately. I don't want us to drift apart." I nodded. I don't either. For a moment, it almost felt real again. The way her eyes searched mine, the way she reached for my hand. But then she said it, the same old line. "You've been acting weird. I think your insecurity is getting in the way of us." There it was, the word that once shattered me. But this time it didn't sting. It just sounded small. I smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right," I said, "but I think I finally understand why." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I stood, walked to the laptop on the coffee table, and pressed a key. The screen lit up with the folder I'd renamed Proof. For a heartbeat, she didn't react. Then her face changed, the kind of change you can't fake. Shock first, then panic, then the quiet calculation of someone deciding which lie might still work. She whispered, "Liam, what is this?" "You tell me," I said. She stepped closer, reaching out. "It's not what you think." I shook my head gently. "Sienna, I've already done the thinking. All that's left is the understanding." Her eyes filled with tears. "Maybe real, maybe not. I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," I said, "but you did anyway." She looked at the photos flashing across the screen, her hand on Adrian's shoulder, the ocean, the hotel sign. Every image a confession in pixels. "I can explain," she whispered. "Don't," I said softly. "For once, just let the truth breathe." The silence that followed felt cleaner than any apology could. After a long pause, she asked, "So what now? Are you going to tell everyone, expose me?" I looked at her, calm and steady. "No, I'm just done pretending this is love." She blinked, confused. "That's it." "That's it," I said. "You wanted me to trust you, remember? So I'm trusting you to live with what you've done." I walked past her, opened the door, and waited. She hesitated for a moment, maybe expecting me to yell, to beg, to do anything but stay silent. But I'd already made peace with the quiet. As she stepped out, she turned back. "Liam, you'll regret this." I met her eyes. "No, I think this time you will." The door closed with a soft click. No drama, no echo, just closure. Later that night, I sat by the window watching the city lights. For the first time in months, the noise outside didn't feel loud. I deleted the folder, every photo, every trace. Not because I forgave her, but because I didn't want my peace to depend on her mistakes. People think revenge is about making someone else feel pain. But real revenge, the kind that lasts, is peace. It's self-respect. It's walking away without needing them to understand why. I took a deep breath, closed the laptop, and whispered to the empty room. "I'm not insecure. I'm just finally sure." And for the first time in a long while, that felt like the truth. 3 weeks passed before I heard anything official. Every day the mailbox stayed empty felt like a slow-motion heartbeat, steady but uncertain. I kept myself busy, morning walks, watering the plants I'd nearly let die, answering work emails that didn't matter. It was strange how normal life looked when your entire world was under quiet review. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. "Ms. Grant," the voice said, "this is Mr. Henley. We've completed the audit." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Tell me," I managed. "Your sister diverted roughly $78,000 from your mother's trust," he said. "We've verified forged signatures. It's irrefutable. The board will reissue your inheritance in full. Victoria has been advised to return what she took." I sat down on the edge of the bed, the clean sheet falling from my hands. "So it's over." "Legally, yes. But these things rarely end cleanly, Amelia. She'll face civil consequences if she refuses to comply. Are you prepared for that?" Prepared? The word meant something different now. Prepared used to mean ready for a fight. Now it meant ready for quiet. "Yes," I said, "I'm prepared." When I hung up, the silence in the house felt heavy but alive. I walked to the window, watching the street below, people carrying groceries, kids running home from school. Ordinary life kept moving, and for the first time I didn't feel left behind. Later that evening, an email arrived from an unknown address. No subject line, no name, just one sentence: "You won." I didn't need to ask who it was. I replied with 3 words: "It wasn't winning." Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk. The sun was low, the sky stained orange and rose. Each step felt lighter, though a small ache still lived behind my ribs. Freedom doesn't erase scars, it just teaches you to breathe around them. When I reached the park, I saw a mother and her little girl feeding ducks. The girl laughed, pure and unguarded. It reminded me of us, Victoria and me, before the competition began, before love had rules and scoreboards. I sat on a bench until the light faded. Maybe we'd both lost something that could never be returned, not money or property, but the version of family we'd once believed in. That night, I found an old voicemail from Victoria I'd saved years ago, back when we were still close. Her voice was bright, teasing. "You're my favorite headache, you know that. Don't ever change." I listened twice, then deleted it. Not out of anger, just release. 2 days later, Henley called again. "She's agreed to settle," he said. "She won't contest it." I thanked him and hung up. The relief that followed wasn't loud or triumphant. It was soft, like the sound of rain on glass. A week after that, a package arrived at my doorstep. No note, no return address. Inside was Mom's bracelet, polished, gleaming. I stared at it for a long time before slipping it onto my wrist. The metal was cool against my skin, but it warmed quickly. Some things, when returned, don't need explanation. That night I dreamed of the table again. The same long table from that first dinner, the one I wasn't allowed to sit at. But this time, the chairs were empty. No laughter, no voices, no perfect smiles, just a single plate and an open chair waiting for me. When I woke up, I realized it wasn't about being invited anymore. It was about learning I could build my own table, even if no one else came. I brewed coffee, watched the morning light spill through the kitchen window, and whispered to the empty room, "It's enough." For once, it really was. The first real morning of peace didn't look like much. No grand sunrise, no emotional music, just the hum of the fridge and the faint smell of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with the bracelet glinting faintly on my wrist and thought, so this is what starting over feels like. Quiet, uncertain, almost holy. I had expected the victory to fill the air, to make me feel justified. Instead, it was small, soft breaths and unclenched fists. I began to rebuild, not by design but by instinct. I cleaned the house top to bottom, sold the furniture that reminded me of her, painted the walls a new shade of pale green, something that didn't echo the old years. Every stroke felt like erasing fingerprints that weren't mine. By the second week, I was sleeping better, eating again. I even laughed once when I burned toast so badly it set off the alarm and the neighbor knocked on the door with a grin. "Still learning the basics, huh?" he said. I smiled back, and for the first time in months, it felt natural. But peace is never a permanent guest. It lingers at the door, testing if it's truly welcome. One afternoon, a thin envelope arrived. No name, just my address written in the neat, deliberate handwriting I knew too well. I held it for a long time, the weight almost nothing, yet it felt like it carried years. Inside was a letter. Short, restrained, the kind you read once and then again just to be sure it's real. "Amelia, they said you got everything back. I'm not writing to fight that. Maybe I deserved worse. Maybe I didn't, but I wanted to tell you something before the noise fades. Mom's last request wasn't about money. She wanted us to stay close. I failed that. You didn't. You kept believing in the idea of family long after I stopped earning it. I'm leaving the city for a while. Don't worry, not hiding, just trying to find out who I am when I'm not winning or losing against you. Take care of the bracelet. She'd like knowing it found its way home. V." I sat at the table with the letter spread open in front of me. The words were plain, unadorned, but something about them cracked a quiet corner of my heart. For a long time, I thought forgiveness had to be earned, proven. But sitting there, I realized maybe it was more about permission, to let go, to stop reliving the wound every time her name surfaced. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the drawer with the rest of my mother's keepsakes. Not as a treasure, not as evidence, just as part of the story. That evening, I walked down to the beach. The sky was low and gray, waves restless but not angry. I took off my shoes and stepped into the cold water. The sea doesn't care who's right. It only takes what you let go of. I whispered, "I forgive you," though I wasn't sure if it was for her or myself, maybe both. A single gull swooped low, the sound sharp and clean. I watched until it vanished into the horizon. Back home, I made tea and opened a blank journal. At the top of the first page, I wrote 3 words, "Begin from peace." The days that followed weren't magical. Bills still came. Work still drained me. There were nights I felt lonely enough to scroll through old photos just to remember laughter. But slowly, the emptiness became space, room for something new. One morning, the neighbor from before, his name was Ryan, I finally asked, waved from across the fence. "Coffee later," he said. And for once I didn't hesitate. Sure. It wasn't about romance. It was about being unafraid to connect again, to let life resume its rhythm. Later that night, as I closed the curtains, I caught my reflection in the glass. I looked older, steadier. The kind of woman who had survived something invisible but defining. The kind of woman who'd learned that peace isn't given, it's built, brick by fragile brick. And maybe, somewhere out there, my sister was doing the same. 3 months passed, and life began to move differently, slower, quieter, almost graceful in its simplicity. I used to think silence was a punishment, but now I saw it for what it really was, recovery. Mornings no longer started with a buzzing phone or anxious thoughts about unread messages. Instead, I woke up to sunlight spilling through half-open blinds and the sound of the city waking up outside my window. I made coffee black, no sugar, and sat on the balcony, watching people rushing to work, couples arguing over nothing, kids running with backpacks too big for their shoulders. And I realized something beautiful. The world had never stopped moving, I had just stopped noticing. Work became my sanctuary. I poured myself into projects I'd neglected for months. Every deadline I met, every idea I executed, it reminded me that I was capable, focused, and strong long before Sienna came into my life. There was a peace in being productive without performing. No one to impress, no one to prove myself to, just me rebuilding. Daniel noticed the change first. He leaned back in his chair one afternoon and said, "You've got that spark again, mate." I laughed. "What spark?" "The one you had before you started bending yourself to keep someone else happy." I smiled faintly. Guess I just stopped bending. Sometimes, though, the memories came back, her laugh, her perfume, the way she'd touch my arm mid-conversation. But instead of pain, there was a calm acceptance. The past was still part of me, but it no longer owned me. I learned to let thoughts pass without holding on, to feel without drowning. There's something powerful about standing where you once fell and realizing you don't hurt anymore. One Sunday morning, I visited the coast. The sky was pale, the wind sharp, the sea restless. I sat on the rocks, shoes off, watching the waves crash against the shore. I thought about how everything in nature breaks, not to end, but to begin again. The tide retreats, but it always returns. The trees lose their leaves, but they bloom again. Maybe heartbreak works the same way. I took out my phone, opened the camera, and snapped a photo of the horizon. No caption, no hashtags, just a quiet reminder to myself that life doesn't stop at pain, it restarts from it. Weeks turned into months, and people started noticing. "You seem happier. You've changed." But the truth was, I hadn't changed. I just found my way back. I started journaling again. Small entries, nothing fancy, just thoughts, gratitude, lessons. Things like, healing isn't forgetting, it's understanding. Peace doesn't need proof. Sometimes closure means never getting an apology and still choosing to move on. Every word was a brick in the quiet house I was building inside myself. One evening, while walking home from work, I passed a small art gallery. Through the window, I saw people laughing, sipping wine, staring at canvases covered in color and chaos. Something drew me inside. Maybe curiosity, maybe the need to feel something new. That's where I met her. She was standing alone, studying a painting of waves crashing against rocks, the same image I'd captured weeks ago. Her expression wasn't admiration, it was understanding. The kind you only get after surviving your own storms. She looked up and smiled politely. It's beautiful, isn't it? I nodded. It is, painful but peaceful. She tilted her head. Exactly, like most real things. We talked for a while, about art, about silence, about the way people try to outrun pain instead of learning from it. She never asked about my past, and I didn't ask about hers. It wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about connection without comparison. When I left that gallery, I realized something. Healing isn't the absence of scars. It's learning to live beautifully with them. That night, I stood at my window again. Same city, same lights, same breeze, but I wasn't the same man. Once, I thought revenge meant making someone else regret losing you. Now, I understood the quiet truth. Revenge is becoming everything they thought you couldn't be. And I had. It's strange how life gives you peace right when you stop chasing it. For months, I had been rebuilding myself quietly, no big gestures, no dramatic changes, just a man learning to breathe again. And then one evening, peace decided to test me. I was at a cafe near downtown, the same one I used to visit with Sienna, though I hadn't thought about her in weeks. I was meeting the woman from the gallery. Her name was Alina. She had this calm energy about her, the kind that doesn't demand space but fills it naturally. We sat by the window, the sound of light rain tapping against the glass. She looked at me and smiled. You always seem peaceful, like you've made friends with your own silence. I chuckled softly. That's a polite way of saying I think too much. She smiled wider. No, it's a way of saying you've survived something that taught you stillness. Her words stayed with me. I didn't realize how deeply they'd cut until I looked up and saw her. Sienna. She was standing just outside the cafe, an umbrella in hand, her eyes scanning the street and then locking on mine. For a moment, the world slowed down. Rain, traffic, voices, all of it faded. Alina noticed my change in expression and turned. Oh, she said quietly, someone you know. I nodded slowly. Someone I used to. Sienna walked in, her movements hesitant. She looked different, tired, almost fragile. Not the confident woman who used to make every room turn toward her. She approached our table and her voice cracked just slightly. Liam, hi. Alina stood, polite as ever. I'll give you 2 a minute, she said softly, gathering her things before stepping outside. Sienna sat down. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, not angry, just final. She broke it first. You look good. I smiled faintly. I feel good. Her eyes flickered with something, regret maybe. I've wanted to talk for a while, she began, but I didn't know how. You just did, I said quietly. She exhaled slowly. I know I hurt you. I was selfish. I thought I could have both, the comfort of you and the thrill of something new, but I lost both in the end. Her honesty caught me off guard. Not because I hadn't imagined this moment, but because I wasn't angry anymore. I used to think if you ever apologized, I said, I'd feel better. But the truth is, I didn't need your apology to move on. She looked down, her fingers trembling. You've changed. I had to, I replied. Pain demands that. For a moment, her eyes filled with tears. Do you hate me? She whispered. I shook my head. No, I don't hate you. Hate means I still care enough to feel. I just understand you now, and that's harder. She swallowed, her voice breaking. I see you've met someone. I glanced out the window, where Alina stood under the awning, scrolling her phone. She's different, I said. She doesn't need to be loud to be understood. Sienna nodded slowly, a tear sliding down her cheek. I used to make fun of your quietness. I thought you were too soft, but now I see it was strength. That line hit me, because once I believed that too, that kindness made me weak, that calmness made me easy to forget. But now I knew the truth. Peace is the loudest power there is. We talked for a while about nothing and everything, about how she'd moved flats, changed jobs, started therapy. She was trying, and I respected that, but I also knew that our chapter had ended long ago. When the conversation paused, She looked at me and said softly, "Do you ever think we could have made it work?" I smiled sadly. We did until lies showed up. Love can survive distance, pride, even time, but it can't survive dishonesty. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "You deserved better." "I know," I said gently, and I finally started giving myself that. As she stood to leave, she hesitated. "I hope she treats you well, Liam." "She does," I replied. "But even if she didn't, I've learned to treat myself well enough that I'll never settle again." She smiled faintly, broken but sincere. "Goodbye, Liam." "Goodbye, Sienna." She walked away into the rain, her figure fatting between the umbrellas and car lights. I watched her go, not with anger, but gratitude. Because sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who push you toward who you're meant to become. When Alina came back inside, she didn't ask questions. She just smiled and said, "You handled that like peace itself." I laughed quietly. Peace took practice. We spent the rest of the evening talking, not about pain, not about the past, but about art, books, life. She didn't fill my silence, she respected it. And for the first time, I realized healing isn't about forgetting who hurt you. It's about remembering yourself without them. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror. The man looking back wasn't angry, bitter, or broken. He was whole. Everything I had lost, trust, love, confidence, I had rebuilt piece by piece. And not for anyone else, just for me. I whispered to my reflection. "You did it. You let go without hate. You healed without closure. You became your own peace." The city outside buzzed with life, neon lights painting the walls in soft color. Somewhere out there, Sienna was learning her lessons too. But that was her story now, and this was mine. I wasn't chasing closure anymore. I was living proof that pain can become power, and silence, a kind of strength. Because in the end, she called me insecure. But I became something far greater. Unshakable. 6 months later, I could barely recognize the man I'd been. The weight that once sat on my chest, the questions, the regrets, the anger, had turned into something quieter. Purpose. The city was the same, but life was. Every morning, I woke before sunrise, brewed my coffee, and watched the skyline bleed from gray to gold. There was something sacred about those first few minutes of light, like a daily reminder that no darkness, no heartbreak, lasts forever. I'd started my own design studio, something I'd dreamed about for years but never had the confidence to try. Funny how pain can strip you down and rebuild you stronger. My small office sat on the 5th floor of a building overlooking the downtown streets. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every inch of it carried the smell of fresh paint, ambition, and quiet resilience. I worked harder than I ever had before, but this time it wasn't to impress anyone, not a boss, not a lover. I worked for peace, for the version of myself who once doubted his worth. Daniel would visit sometimes, leaning against my desk with his usual grin. "Mate, you've changed your whole life," he said one afternoon. I looked up from my sketches. "Not changed," I replied. "I just stopped living for validation." He laughed and started living for yourself. "Exactly," I said, smiling. "It's peaceful when you don't need to prove your value to anyone." He nodded slowly. "You know, I was worried about you at first, thought you'd drown in that heartbreak." "I almost did," I admitted, "but drowning taught me how to breathe again." Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. I learned to enjoy the small things, long walks after rain, random conversations with strangers, cooking dinner while old music played in the background. Sometimes, when I passed the cafe where I'd last seen Sienna, I'd pause for a moment, not out of sadness, but reflection. That place wasn't a wound anymore. It was a landmark, a reminder of where the old me ended and the new me began. Alina became a quiet part of my life, not a whirlwind, not a storm. She was steady. She'd stop by my office sometimes, bringing coffee and sketches for her next exhibition. "You're obsessed with lines and balance," she teased one day, looking at my designs. I grinned. "I guess I like things that make sense." "Doesn't mean they have to be perfect," she said, brushing a bit of graphite off my hand. Sometimes beauty lives in the flaws. Her words stayed with me, because for the first time I wasn't chasing perfection, not in work, not in people, not in love. One evening, I found myself walking home late. The streets were quiet, rain glistening on the pavement like scattered stars. I stopped outside a bookstore, drawn by the warm light spilling through the window. Inside, the air smelled of paper and rain. I picked up a small journal, black cover, simple. It reminded me of the one I used to write in after everything fell apart. I opened the first page and wrote, Chapter 4, Becoming. And then below it, healing isn't a destination, it's a daily decision. I smiled to myself, closed the book, and paid for it. That night, I wrote until the city fell asleep, thoughts, reflections, dreams. I didn't realize it then, but I was writing the story of a man who refused to let heartbreak define him. Weeks passed and business started growing. Clients came in through referrals. Projects stacked up. My team expanded from 1 to 4. There were stressful days, sure, but even stress felt different now. It was a sign of progress, not pressure. Sometimes I'd look around the office, the sketches on the wall, the plants by the window, the faint hum of life around me, and think, this is what healing builds when you stop looking backward. One Friday evening, I received an email from a magazine editor. We're doing a feature on independent designers shaping modern spaces. Would you be open to an interview? I stared at the screen for a long moment, smiling in disbelief. A year ago, I'd been lost in heartbreak. Now, my work was being noticed. During the interview, the journalist asked, What inspired you to start this company? I thought for a moment before replying. Loss, but not in the way people think. I lost someone and then I found myself. The company came from that silence, from learning that pain can either destroy you or become the blueprint for something better. After the interview, I sat by my office window, watching the city lights ripple across the glass. My phone buzzed, a message from Alina. Look up at the sky tonight. There's a full moon, perfect night to be grateful. I stepped outside. The moon hung heavy and bright, the air cool against my skin. I whispered to myself, You made it, Liam, not because you won her back, but because you won yourself. And for a moment, standing under that sky, I felt something stronger than happiness, peace that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I went home that night and opened my journal again. The past is not my home, I wrote. I visit it sometimes, but I don't live there anymore. And that, more than success, more than recognition, was my real victory. Because once, I thought love was about finding someone who made me feel complete. But now I knew the truth. Love starts when you learn to stand whole, even alone. The night was strangely peaceful. No storms, no thunder, just the steady hum of the city beyond my balcony. I sat there with a mug of black coffee, my laptop open, and the soft glow of streetlights flickering through the blinds. It had been weeks since Sienna left, weeks since I chose silence over chaos. Funny how healing doesn't come with fireworks. It arrives slowly, like a sunrise you almost didn't notice. I'd stopped checking her socials, stopped replaying that night in my head, stopped asking why me, and started asking what now. Every heartbreak leaves a gift, if you're patient enough to unwrap it. Mine was clarity. For years, I'd built my life around her validation, her smile, her attention, her moods. But once the noise faded, I realized how much of myself I'd been editing to fit her comfort zone. I used to silence my instincts, my curiosity, my ambitions, just to seem easy to love. Now, I was learning that love shouldn't demand your silence. One evening, as I was packing old clothes to donate, I found her gray hoodie. The one she'd always wear when we'd stay in and talk for hours. My first instinct was to throw it away, but then I stopped. Instead, I folded it gently and placed it in a box marked past. Because closure isn't burning what hurt you, it's accepting that it once meant something. I'd started journaling again, something I hadn't done since university. Writing helped me untangle the chaos in my head. Each page became a quiet confession of lessons I'd ignored while chasing her approval. Maybe love isn't about finding someone who completes you, I wrote one night, but finding someone who respects what's already complete. Around that time, I joined a photography group, just a few local creatives who met every weekend to capture city life. It felt strange at first, walking into a room without her shadow beside me, but slowly I began to feel alive again. Through the lens, I started noticing things I'd forgotten to appreciate. The reflections of neon lights in puddles, the way strangers smiled at their phones, the rhythm of footsteps on pavements. Every photo was a small reminder. Life goes on. One Sunday afternoon, while editing pictures at a cafe, a girl named Alara from the same photography club sat beside me. She had that kind of calm energy you don't notice until everything else goes quiet. "You've got an eye for melancholy," she said, looking at one of my shots. I smiled faintly, or maybe it's just honesty. She nodded. Sometimes they're the same thing. We talked for hours about art, purpose, and how pain sharpens your vision. She didn't ask about Sienna, and I didn't feel the need to mention her. For the first time in months, a conversation didn't revolve around loss. It revolved around growth. That night, I realized healing isn't about replacing people. It's about rediscovering the parts of yourself that you buried while trying to keep someone else happy. When I got home, I opened my journal again and wrote, "Forgiveness isn't about them deserving peace. It's about me deserving freedom." I didn't need to show Sienna that I'd moved on. The real revenge was peace, unbothered, steady, and quietly radiant. She once called me insecure for noticing what was wrong, but insecurity fades when truth takes its place. A few days later, she texted, a simple "Hey, can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Once, that message would have shaken my world. Now it barely rippled my calm. I typed 3 words back. "No need to." And for the first time, I meant it. I closed my phone, stepped outside, and watched the city lights shimmer below. There was no anger left, no ache, just a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes when you finally stop running after closure and start creating it yourself. Because sometimes, the most powerful ending is peace. It's strange how the same city that once felt suffocating can suddenly start to feel like home again. Months had passed since that final message to Sienna, "No need to." I didn't realize it at the time, but those 3 words marked not the end of a relationship, but the beginning of myself. I'd moved into a smaller apartment near the old downtown streets of Los Angeles. Nothing fancy, just white walls, soft light, and a balcony that caught the morning sun. I loved the quiet hum of the place, the smell of coffee drifting through the hallway every morning. For the first time in years, my days were my own. Most people think healing is dramatic, that it's about traveling somewhere new, cutting off everyone, or reinventing yourself overnight. But I learned it's far simpler. Healing is waking up one day and realizing you no longer check your phone for their name. It's hearing their favorite song and not feeling your chest tighten. It's laughing again, freely, genuinely, without guilt. I started volunteering at a local art center. They ran weekend workshops for teenagers who were struggling, kids with broken homes, anxiety, or simply no direction. The first time I stood there, camera in hand, facing that group of quiet faces, I saw fragments of my younger self in them, lost, uncertain, but hungry for something meaningful. "Photography isn't about taking pictures," I told them. "It's about learning to see." They stared at me, confused at first, until I explained. When you're behind a lens, you stop rushing, you start noticing. Every shadow, every crack, every reflection, it's a story waiting to be seen. The more you notice the world, the less you drown in your own thoughts. One boy, maybe 16, raised his hand. "But what if everything around you just hurts to look at?" I paused. His words hit harder than I expected. I took a slow breath and replied, "Then start with small things that don't. The light on your window, the way water ripples when you drop a pebble. Healing begins when you look for something beautiful, even in places that hurt." That day, I realized I wasn't there to teach them photography. I was there to teach them how to see life again. After class, as the sun dipped below the skyline, one of the mentors at the center, Claire, approached me. She'd been watching quietly from the back of the room. "You speak like someone who's lived it," she said softly. I smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." She nodded. "You should share that story. People need to hear it." Her words stayed with me that night. Later, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began typing. Not for Sienna, not for pity, but for anyone who'd ever been called too sensitive, too emotional, or insecure, when all they were guilty of was caring too deeply. The story flowed out of me, raw, honest, unfiltered. Every line felt like a confession, every paragraph like a release. It wasn't about betrayal anymore, it was about rebirth. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking. Light seeped through the curtains, golden and new. I read the final line aloud. "Sometimes losing them is how you find yourself." It was strange how peace felt nothing like I'd imagined. No fireworks, no applause, just a deep, quiet understanding that everything that fell apart had to, so I could rebuild with truth. Weeks later, I posted that story online, not expecting anything. But then the comments began flooding in. People from all over wrote, "This saved me. This is exactly what I needed." I thought I was the only one. For the first time, I realized my pain wasn't unique, but my recovery could be a map for someone else. And that's when it clicked. This was the purpose behind everything that had gone wrong. I wasn't meant to stay broken. I was meant to turn my cracks into light for others to follow. So I started a small online project called The Honest Lens, a place where people could share their stories, photos, and reflections on heartbreak, healing, and growth. It wasn't about perfection, it was about honesty. And with every story shared, I felt lighter, stronger, whole. Maybe that's what redemption really is, not revenge, not forgetting, but transforming what once hurt you into something that helps others heal. As I stood by the balcony that evening, watching the city glow beneath the fading sun, I whispered to myself, "You did it, Liam. You turned the pain into purpose." And for the first time, it truly felt real. The sky was painted in soft gold that evening, the kind of sunset that looked like it had been brushed by forgiveness itself. I stood by the balcony, camera in hand, taking slow shots of the fading light. Somewhere below, the city was alive, cars humming, laughter spilling from cafes, life quietly moving forward. And for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing it. I was simply part of it. The Honest Lens had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. People from around the world began sending their stories, heartbreaks, rediscoveries, and quiet moments of courage. Some wrote about lost loves, others about finding strength after betrayal. Every submission was raw, honest, human. It was beautiful, knowing that pain could unite people more deeply than perfection ever could. One afternoon, while I was sorting through submissions at the art center, Claire walked in with someone new. "Liam," she said, "this is Arya. She's joining our photography sessions this month." Arya smiled, calm, soft-eyed, carrying the kind of stillness that speaks louder than words. "I've read your blog," she said, extending her hand. "You have a way of making people feel seen." I smiled, shaking her hand. That's the goal, to remind people they're not invisible. Over the next few weeks, Arya became part of the small circle I'd built. She wasn't loud or overly expressive, but there was depth in her silence. Her photos weren't technically perfect, yet they had soul. One evening after class, as the others left, she lingered behind. "You know," she began softly, "I used to think healing meant forgetting what happened. But your stories, they made me realize healing just means remembering differently." Her words hit something deep in me. I nodded. "Yeah, it's not about erasing the past, it's about reclaiming it." She smiled. "Exactly." That night, as I walked home under the orange streetlights, I thought about how far I'd come. There was a time when trust felt impossible, when love seemed like a risk I'd never take again. But now I understood love doesn't have to be loud or perfect. It just has to be honest. A few days later, while I was curating an online post for The Honest Lens, I found myself writing a piece not about heartbreak, but about gratitude. Thank you to the ones who left, I wrote, because their absence taught me presence. Thank you to the lies, they led me to truth. And thank you to the pain, it introduced me to peace. I hit publish, and for the first time there were no tears, no tremors, no ache, just peace. Weeks rolled by, and life started to feel full again. I began hosting workshops about storytelling and self-expression. People showed up with broken hearts and trembling voices, but they left lighter, not because I had answers, but because I gave them space to feel. One woman, after sharing her story, hugged me and whispered, "Your words gave me permission to start again." And that was it, the moment I realized the full circle of it all. What began as a heartbreak had become a bridge for others to heal. Later that evening, as I packed up my camera, Aria walked over again. "You've built something powerful, Liam," she said, "but don't forget you deserve joy too." Her tone was gentle but steady. I looked at her for a moment and smiled. Maybe I'm finally ready for that. We walked out together into the night, the air crisp with the smell of rain and beginnings. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by memories or driven by revenge. I just felt human. And maybe that's what true healing looks like, not forgetting who broke you, but becoming someone they could never break again. As the rain began to fall softly, I tilted my head back, closed my eyes, and whispered a quiet thank you not to her, not to anyone else, but to life itself. Because every ending, no matter how painful, carries a hidden beginning. And mine had finally begun. The hall was silent, that kind of silence that hums with anticipation. 100 faces looked up at me from the dimly lit audience, cameras ready, notebooks open. The stage lights were warm, almost too bright, and for a brief moment I could see my own reflection in the teleprompter, a man I barely recognized. "My name is Liam Carter," I began. My story started with heartbreak, but it didn't end there. A low murmur rippled through the audience, the recognition of someone who had read my story online. The honest lens had grown beyond what I'd ever dreamed. What began as a quiet blog born out of pain had turned into a global movement of people sharing truth without shame. But standing there, I wasn't thinking about the fame. I was thinking about how I got here. How one night, one mistake had shattered me. And how the same moment, months later, had rebuilt me into someone I was proud of. As I spoke, the room felt weightless. I once believed forgiveness was about saying it's okay, but it's not, I said. Forgiveness means saying it happened, and I won't let it define me anymore. Every eye in the hall stayed on me. Every word hung heavy, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. I told them about Sienna, about the hidden photos, the night I found the truth, the sleepless hours that followed. But I didn't tell it like a story of betrayal anymore, I told it like a lesson. When you're betrayed, I continued, you think the pain is punishment, but sometimes it's preparation for the person you're meant to become. Someone in the front row wiped a tear. Another nodded silently. I paused, took a slow breath, and smiled faintly. I used to think revenge meant making them regret losing me. Now I know real revenge is peace. Real strength is not needing to prove anything anymore. The crowd stayed utterly quiet. It wasn't a silence of boredom. It was the silence of reflection. Behind my calm tone, my mind wandered for a second. I thought of all the nights I spent questioning myself, replaying moments, rewriting what I could have said, drowning in what-ifs. And now, here I was standing on a stage, not broken, not bitter, but grateful. Grateful for the heartbreak that forced me to rebuild. Grateful for the loneliness that pushed me towards purpose. Grateful for the loss that led me home to myself. After the talk ended, people came up to me one by one. A young woman hugged me and whispered, "He cheated on me last year. Your story, it gave me strength." A man said quietly, "I thought being sensitive made me weak, but now I see it's my power." I shook hands, exchanged words, but inside, I just felt still. No noise, no rush, just peace. Later that evening, I found myself walking along the empty pier near Santa Monica. The ocean stretched endlessly, dark and calm, reflecting the faint light of the moon. I sat down, listening to the waves. The sound reminded me of my heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. And then, without thinking, I took out my phone and scrolled through my old messages. I hadn't done that in months. There she was, Sienna. No anger, no ache, just a faint memory like a chapter in a book I no longer needed to reread. I smiled quietly and whispered, "Thank you." Because she'd taught me everything. Through her lies, I found my truth. Through her silence, I found my voice. I deleted the thread, not in bitterness, but in completion. As I put my phone away, a soft breeze swept across the pier. Somewhere far off, music drifted from a street performer's guitar, the kind of melody that feels like closure. And in that moment, I realized something simple, something profound. Healing isn't the end of pain. It's learning to live beautifully with the lessons it left behind. That night, under the quiet stars, I whispered a line that I'd later end my next speech with. We can't control who breaks us, but we can choose who we become after. And for me, that choice was freedom. The rain had just stopped when I walked out of the studio. The air smelled fresh, like the city had just washed away its sins. The streets glistened under the soft yellow streetlights, puddles catching reflections of everything above: buildings, faces, stars. It was one of those nights that felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. The interview had gone well, better than I expected. I'd spoken about the honest lens, about forgiveness, about the power of truth. But when the cameras turned off and the lights dimmed, I realized something deeper. I wasn't telling my story anymore. I was letting it go. Walking toward my car, I could still hear the host's final question echoing in my mind. "Liam, if you could go back and change what happened, would you?" At the time, I'd smiled softly and said, "No, because without the pain, I wouldn't have met myself." Now, in the quiet hum of the city, that answer sank even deeper. I drove to the coast, the same spot where I used to come with Sienna. Not to dwell, but to close the loop. The ocean was vast, dark, infinite. Waves rolled gently against the shore, whispering secrets only peace can understand. I stepped out of the car, the cool wind brushing against my face, and sat on the hood, staring out into the horizon. The same horizon I, once stared at with tears, confusion, anger, now felt like a mirror of calm. I thought about her, not with hate, not with longing, but with understanding. Because in her breaking me, she unknowingly built the version of me I'd always needed to become. Back then, I thought love was about holding on. Now I know it's about knowing when to let go, gracefully, without bitterness, without the need to prove who was right. Forgiveness wasn't about her deserving peace. It was about me deserving rest. My phone buzzed beside me, a message from Arya. "Your talk tonight was beautiful. You sounded free." I smiled. She didn't know how right she was. I typed back, "I finally am." And I meant it, every word. The sky started to lighten as dawn began to break. A faint pink hue spread across the water, and the waves glowed under it, soft, endless, alive. I lifted my camera and took a photo. Not for a post, not for a caption, but for memory, to remind myself that endings can be beautiful too. As I stood there, I whispered quietly, almost like a prayer. "To the ones who broke me, thank you. To the nights that hurt, I forgive you. To the version of me that begged for love, I set you free." And with that, I felt something lift, like the final weight of the story leaving my chest. I walked back to the car, sunlight catching the edge of the windshield, warm against my skin. The world felt new again. No bitterness, no ghosts, just peace. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's living so freely that their memory can't even touch you anymore. As I drove away, the city woke slowly behind me, and a single thought played softly in my mind, a truth I'd waited years to understand. She called me insecure. But in the end, I found the kind of security she could never give, the kind that comes from within. And that was the real ending. Not revenge. Not heartbreak. But peace.